In today's video, we're talking about wildlife photography and what equipment you need if you're just starting out. Hey everyone, welcome into Magnolia Photography SC. I'm Jeff House, and I'm a wildlife photographer in Charleston, South Carolina. So you're getting into wildlife photography. Maybe you like to be out in nature, take walks, go on hikes, and you really enjoy animals and birds or whatever the case may be, but you thought maybe taking some pictures while you're out there would be a lot of fun. And it is. So congratulations on getting into this and having an interest in it. I'm telling you, once you get started, you're going to be hooked. But you might be wondering, what equipment do I need? Because I do have an interest in it, and I started Googling some equipment. And next thing I knew, I was looking at cameras that are $4,000, $5,000, $6,000. I was looking at lenses that were $13,000, $14,000, $15,000, sometimes even more. Do you need to really drop $20,000 to $25,000 to enjoy wildlife photography, even as a small hobby in your life? And the answer, of course, is no, you don't. And we're going to prevent you from making that mistake today by sharing with you how to buy equipment and what to look for when purchasing equipment. Now, there are some bad things that come with wildlife photography equipment, such as cost, right? The equipment is large, it's specialized, and those two things tend to make the equipment a little bit more expensive compared to many other genres of photography. But the good news is this: you really only need a camera and a lens when it comes to wildlife photography, and the used marketplace for camera equipment has never been better than it is today. You no longer have to go to places like eBay to make purchases from a private seller, wondering if you're going to be scammed, and many people have been scammed, including myself. So I don't recommend going that route. I recommend going through a company like KEH. They're an online store that does two things. They buy and sell used equipment. I've never purchased anything from them, but I do know people that have, and it was very successful. But I did sell 3 cameras to them, and I had a very successful experience in every instance. So it is a great way to get used equipment. It's a great way to get used equipment with a warranty. I believe most of their equipment will come with a 6-month warranty. I think worst case scenario, it comes with a 3-month warranty, but I think just about everything at this point is 6 months. So you have that peace of mind that if you buy something used, you're going to have a warranty with it. All right, with that out of the way, let's talk about the equipment that you need and what you should look for. And let's kick it off with a camera. But before I do that, I do want to say one quick thing. When we're talking about the fact that you only need a camera and a lens for wildlife photography, which one is more important? Which one should you invest more money in? And the answer is very quickly, the lens. The lens is what's going to give you the sharpness from your photos. That's what's going to give you the clarity, the beauty, right? All those things, the nice colors, all those great things. So, if you're going to invest, I don't know, $1,500 or $2,000 into a complete setup, I would highly recommend that maybe you spend somewhere between $500 to $800 on your camera and then spend the rest of the money on your camera lens. The lens is where the quality's at. You can get away with a lesser quality camera and still create very beautiful, beautiful images. But let's talk about that camera. What type of camera should you get? You may have heard things like crop sensor or full frame. Well, that's basically the 2 types of sensors that you have for the most part. There are others, but we're going to focus on what you will see 99% of the time. And really all a full frame means is if you put a 50 millimeter lens on it, you have a field of view that is 50 millimeters. But if you have a crop sensor, which is usually a 1.5 time zoom, that's what happens with a crop sensor. If you put that same 50 millimeter lens on, your view will be a little bit more narrow, but your total focal length will go from 50 millimeters to 75 millimeters. That's what happens with a crop sensor. So it can be a little bit of an advantage because you get a little bit more reach from your lenses, and that can be very beneficial in wildlife photography. So that's the first thing that I would decide upon. If you can go full frame, if your budget allows for it, I would go that route because full frame does tend to produce better quality images, but the crop sensor will produce beautiful images still, and you'll get that extra reach, and you will save some money on your initial investment into your camera. The next thing that you're going to be wanting to consider when it comes to your camera is a camera with a great autofocusing system. And this probably seems obvious, right? Animals are moving. If you're photographing birds like I often do, they're flying, they're moving erratically, they're moving quickly. Having a good autofocus system is essential. Otherwise, you're going to get a lot of blurry pictures, and it's going to be something that deters you from wanting to get out there to photograph wildlife. Next thing you're going to be looking at are frames per second. And this is simply how quickly and how many photos your camera will take per second. So I do shoot with a more expensive camera. It's the Sony A1, and it shoots 30 frames per second. It's also a $6,400 camera. If that's not your budget, then you're not going to be looking at 30 frames per second. But for a reasonably priced camera, you should be able to find something in that 7 to 10 frames per second. Now, the only difference, of course, will be as you're photographing an animal or a bird. Let's just say you're photographing a bird flying. At 30 frames per second, you're going to get a lot more photos, which means you're going to get a lot more poses, which means you're going to get a lot more images that you like, right? Because you're going to have the wings in much better positions more of the time, so you'll have more keeper images typically. 7 to 10 frames will still get you a lot of pictures. You'll still get good poses. You just need to understand that you're going to sacrifice in that regard a little bit. But it's a great way to go if you're in that range. I wouldn't go much slower than that because, again, I think you're going to find yourself in a position where you may not get a lot of keepers because you're not capturing the animal in good positions and good poses. And you may find that you get rid of a lot of images, and that, again, becomes frustrating and deters you from wanting to go out and photograph. The next feature you should consider when looking at cameras is megapixels. Now, most of the cameras out there on the market today are going to be somewhere between 20 to 60 megapixels. So what's important here? Well, what's going to be important here is the megapixels is going to be a determiner on what your pictures look like as far as how close you are to the animal. Because one of the biggest things that we do in wildlife photography is crop the image to bring the animal closer to the viewer. If you're using a 24, 26 megapixel camera, you're going to be very limited with how much you can crop, because the more you crop, the more resolution you're sacrificing in your images, and it's going to severely degrade them. So what I would recommend if you plan on cropping, and this is going to be a big thing for you in your workflow and your process, is get at least 45 megapixels when it comes to your camera. That's going to allow you to crop heavily, bring that animal much closer, and you're going to be far happier with the overall quality of the images. Again, just like we talked about in the first two features, if you're cropping with a lower megapixel camera and the quality of your pictures is becoming very degraded, you're going to get very frustrated. And again, this is going to be another deterrent from getting out there and taking photos. Lastly, the next thing that you want to look at when it comes to camera is ISO performance. We talk all the time that a lot of wildlife photography is done in the early mornings and the early evenings when we might have beautiful light because the sun angle is lower and it creates a beautiful soft light. But the problem is we don't have a lot of light. So we have to use higher ISO values in order to capture images with faster shutter speeds. If the camera you're using has a very poor ISO system, the problem will be bad looking photos that you cannot even fix in editing. This will be yet another deterrent from you going out and taking pictures, especially in low light, right? You might find that you're constantly out in the middle of the afternoon where the sun is its harshest, and you may not really like the light there either because it creates a lot of shadows and it's not very pretty light. So consider the ISO features of the camera. Make sure that they are at least rated in a, decent for ISO, because that will be a big thing in capturing some good, clean photos. The next thing that you're going to want to look at is your camera lens. And as I said earlier, the lens is more important than the camera. Now, really, when it comes to the lens, the thing that you're going to be looking at most is how far will it reach, right? How many millimeters is it? So when it comes to wildlife photography, you're going to want a lens that's at least 300 millimeters. A lot of people will have a lens that's 70 to 200 millimeters. And yeah, you might be able to get away with that if you have a super high megapixel camera that's, 50, 60 megapixels, but it's still going to be severely limiting when it comes to capturing wildlife photos. So 300 millimeters is really the least amount that you would want. And ideally, you're looking for a lens that will go up to 500 or 600 millimeters. Now, there are a lot of great options out there for the different camera manufacturers, a lot of third-party lenses where the zoom range is 150 millimeters to 600 millimeters. That's a great way to save money. Those lenses usually cost somewhere around $1,200 to $1,300 and go up as high as $1,600 or $1,700. But that would be kind of a good spot in order to get a zoom lens with a good focal range there. So that 150 to 600 is pretty decent. But again, if you don't have that in the budget and you need to go with a 300 millimeter lens, that's where you can start out, and then you can go from there, of course. Now, you might be thinking, what if I get a 300 millimeter lens and I get a teleconverter, right? So a teleconverter is a little piece of equipment that goes on your camera between your lens, and it actually attaches to the camera, and then your lens would attach that. So it's between the camera and the lens. That's what the teleconverter, that's where it goes. And what it will do is it will extend the reach of your lens. Very much like the crop sensor that I was talking about earlier. And you can buy these teleconverters in different extensions. So some will come in 1.4, some will come in 2. But I warn you before considering that, unless you have a really, really good lens, do not buy a teleconverter. It will be a waste of money because it does reduce the sharpness of your photos. So the only way that you can afford to reduce some sharpness in your photos is if you have a really good lens already that's producing super sharp photos. So don't do that. The other thing that you have to consider is that when you put a teleconverter on, it's going to change your aperture, right? So if your lens has an aperture of 5.6 or 6.3, and you put a 1.4 teleconverter on there, the fastest aperture that your lens is now going to have is probably going to be somewhere around f9 or f10, right? So that goes back to what we were talking about earlier with having a camera with a good ISO performance. If you are at an aperture of f9 or f10, you are going to be needing to shoot in situations where the light is brighter. You will not be able to shoot in those early morning or early evening situations because you just won't have enough light. You won't be able to get any images that have an exposure that you can work with. So stay away from the teleconverters unless you have a good lens, a really, really good lens. It is something that a lot of people go out and get thinking, wow, I'm going to turn this 300 millimeter lens into a 600 millimeter lens, and I'm going to have all this reach, and I'm going to have all these, beautiful photos, and I'm going to do it for a fraction of the price. Then they go out and they take photos and they come back and they go, what was I thinking? This isn't working like I had planned. This was the worst money I ever spent. And they're very disappointed. They too become frustrated, and then you don't want to go out and take pictures. We don't want that to happen. So another piece of equipment, in addition to the camera and lens that you might want to consider, is a tripod or a monopod. Now, I use a monopod. I'm using the Sony 200 to 600 lens. It's not a overly huge lens like those big 600 millimeter prime lenses that we see on the sides of like football games and, big wildlife photographers that are out there making tons of money for, National Geographic. So, those types of lenses are just they're really tough to carry, right? You get tired very quickly. My lens is a lot like that. It does have some weight to it. It is obviously a larger lens to your more traditional lenses that you're going to be used to, and over time it will wear on you. So it is really helpful to have it on a tripod or monopod. But if you just have a 300 millimeter lens or something along those lines, you probably don't need to invest in a tripod or a monopod immediately. That'll be something that you can probably wait on. And just remember this, don't skimp on your tripod and your monopod, right? They are weighted for certain amounts of weight, and make sure that you get one that you can grow into. I know that, you might have a smaller lens and a smaller camera to start off. It might only be, 10 pounds or 7 pounds for your camera and lens. Don't buy a tripod that's rated for 15 pounds, because you will outgrow that if you stick with wildlife photography as you upgrade your equipment. And the last thing that you want to do is invest thousands and thousands of dollars into your equipment to put it onto a tripod or a monopod that falls over when you put your equipment on there, because it just doesn't have the quality to support it, right? That's a great way to damage your equipment, and it will ruin your day, I promise you. So get a tripod or a monopod that's rated. I think it's good to get one that's rated for at least 30 pounds or more. And that way you have the peace of mind that you can put a big camera and a big lens on there. And if you do any other accessories later on in the future, you'll never have to worry about having equipment that is too heavy for the tripod. Okay, guys, that's where I'm going to end this video. I don't want to make it too long or go too deep. Hopefully you have a real good idea now of what you need to get started in wildlife photography. Again, check out KEH for used equipment. That is a great way to go. If you have any questions, if there's anything I didn't cover that you want to know, hit me up in the questions below, in the comments below. I will be happy to answer any questions you might have, and you can go from there. I hope you found this video helpful and informative. And if you did, please consider subscribing to the channel, and please consider liking and sharing the video as well, as the more it gets out there, the more people will be able to see this information, and the more the channel will grow, and I will appreciate your support. Thanks so much for stopping by and spending some time with me today. I look forward to seeing everyone in the next video. Until then, take care.